Hi everyone, thanks so much for tuning in today. This is Kathy. Today I'm going to be sharing a card, is this my third? Yes, this is the third card in my holiday series for 2018. And I kind of realized that I hadn't really shown the products that I'd used in the first two videos, so I'm doing that this time. I had used this Happy Christmas die in the second video, and I will also be using it in this video. I used the Sweet Holiday Penguin stamp set from My Favorite Things in the first and second video, and I'll also be using it in this third video. And finally, in this video, I'm going to be using the Die-namics Blueprints number 27. This is the full set of the dies that you receive in this set. And the dies that I'm using in this video are the scalloped background that's also got stitching detail on it, as well as this piece here that's got the little frames, also has the stitching detail around it. What I did love about this particular blueprint set was all these extra pieces that come with it. The sentiment banners, the little banners here. I mean, the possibilities of this die set alone are endless. So I was pretty excited to be able to use at least two of them for this card. So anyway, let's get started. Okay, so for this card, the first thing I did was I used the die with all the little windows, and I ran it through my Gemini Junior with a piece of white cardstock. And then for the squares, that's where I stamped the little penguins. It is 80-pound Nina Solar White cardstock, and I will stamp these little guys in Memento Tuxedo Black ink. One thing that I did do was I added a little bit of adhesive to the back of the squares so that they would stay put while they were in my stamp positioner. After I had them stamped, I'll be doing some Copic coloring. And normally, lately I've just been having music play while I do coloring, but there were a couple of tips specifically with these guys because it's such a small area that I decided to do a full voiceover and share a couple of tips and tricks that I learned along the way. I started out with my darkest color, which is W4, and I'm adding the shadow underneath the little brim of his hat. Simple coloring, did I already say this, that for the penguins I'm only doing a 2-color blend, again because the images are so small. What I did was I kind of concentrated mostly where the darkest areas would be, specifically under the brim of the hat at the very bottom of the image where his little hand is curling over that candy cane, which you really can't even tell that's a candy cane until I start to color the candy cane. For this little guy here, again, I continued with my darkest color, and you'll see my hand kind of flick up a little bit with the marker, and I am doing tiny little flick marks there, but when I actually pull the marker off the cardstock and do a flick in the air like I did just there, that's a reminder for myself to loosen the grip on the marker. I tend to have a death grip on my pen or marker when I'm coloring tiny little areas or tiny little pieces of cardstock. And as odd as it sounds, the more relaxed your hand is, the better control you will have with that marker. So when I do flick up like that, it's a reminder to myself to loosen up. I don't need to choke the poor marker to death. On this guy, I added the shading on that little arm there. I do the shading on the bottom, and on the other arm you'll see that I do the shading on the top because that little arm is right under his face. So that is where the shadow would be cast, is on the top of his arm rather than the underside of his arm. The second color that I use is W3, and again it's a 2-color blend, easy peasy. Just again, small little spaces, so I'm not going to get a whole lot of fancy blending in there. Well, I suppose I could, but for me, I was happy with the 2-color blend. I continue with the gray and I finished that up, and then I think I move on to the little wreath on this guy. He's, and that's one of the things too with these, because they were only stamped on 1 by 1 squares. Once you start adding all the color into the little accessories like the wreath and the candy cane, it's a lot more obvious what these little guys are holding. And here I'm thinking, do I need more blending? Nope, moving on. So I just fill in this third little guy there with the W3. And it did help to leave the adhesive on the back of those squares, because I do have a Ranger craft mat that I work on, and it kept the squares from moving every time I tried to move it. I had to be very deliberate about it because they were stuck, and usually I just flip my paper pretty quick. Moving right along, I just colored their beaks in with YR15, and then I add in a little bit of shading with YR18 just on the corners of their little beaks. And then I'll come back in with the YR15 just to blend it out a little bit, because the YR18, it's quite a bit darker than the 15, so it kind of had some pretty sharp lines there. And coming back in with the 15 definitely helped blend those out. Yes, so here it is for the little wreath there. I wanted a pretty bright green, and the coloring, I'm not even coloring. I am just dabbing along those little pine needles of the wreath. And I used G05 because it's a pretty vibrant color. I also used that on his little scarf. And there was an area, his scarf is striped, and I actually went in on one of the stripes in the wrong spot. It should have been red, which is this red here. It's R29, and I did that for the holly berries and then the other stripes on his scarf. And since I caught myself that I was putting green in a spot that should have been red, I was able to go in with my colorless blender and dab up that green and set it aside to let the colorless blender dry a little bit before I go back in with the red. For the little Santa hats, particularly on this one, I used R59, which again, that's my darkest shade, and I added it along the top of the fur trim and then under where the little crease where that little hat is folded over. Then I come in with the R29, that's my mid-tone. I did use 3 colors on the Santa hats, only because with reds, for whatever reason, I can't seem to use anything less than 3 colors, and normally I use at least 4, sometimes 5. The last color, my lightest color, is R24, and that was just to add the highlight on the top of that piece of his hat that is folded over. And again, with his hat, it's the same colors, R59, R29, and R24. And the shading that I did on this one was the opposite of the other little penguin wearing a hat, because they're facing each other. And on the card, because they're facing each other, I kind of wanted the light coming from the lighter part to be on the left-hand side. So when I come in with the R29 on this hat here, I bring it out pretty far, but I leave that white spot there to fill it in with the R24. As far as the candy cane goes, I didn't even try to do more than 1 color. I just did the R29 for the candy cane. And right there, my marker started to pool, so I pulled off the other cap just so it wouldn't blob of red ink wouldn't land on my candy cane there. And I'm just filling in with the R24 right there to finish off his little hat there. And then I remember that I need to fix the scarf on the other guy, so I bring the marker back in and go in and fix that up. And the colorless blender worked well enough to pull up enough of that green. You can't even tell in real life that I even made a little boo-boo there. Okay, so the Happy Christmas die, I used that and I cut it out of red cardstock. And from that window frame die from the blueprints, there is a rectangle. So I kept the rectangle from the first cut, and then I ran another piece of white cardstock through it with the Happy Christmas die, because there was no way I was going to get those letters lined up straight. I can't draw a straight line with a ruler, not even a T-square ruler, and I thought this was going to be the only way that these letters were going to end up straight. So I taped it with temporary tape on top of the white rectangle that will actually go into the frame from the blueprints die, and then just glued the letters down. And here's a little tip here: the H and the S's as well, they do have a direction to go, and I had the H upside down at first, so you saw me flip that, and then with the S I go in and I make sure that it's going in the right way before I put the glue on it. And the glue that I'm using is just a Zig two-way glue pen, and that one is the broader tip. It's not the ballpoint, just because I had a little bit more surface area to cover, and I wanted to make sure that those letters stayed stuck really well. The tweezers that I'm using, they're actually reverse tweezers, so I don't have to hold them closed. I actually have to squeeze them to open them, which is really nice because then your hands don't cramp up, trying to hold it still forever. Once I get all of those down, I take off that top layer there, and Christmas is lined up perfectly. I put that in my stamp positioner because I wanted to add another sentiment, which reads, Happy, Merry, Joyful Christmas. And since I already had Christmas there, I put a piece of painter's tape over the word Christmas on the actual stamp to mask that off. Then I'll ink it up with my Memento Tuxedo black ink and remove the painter's tape and stamp it down on that panel. And now I think it is time to put the card together, right? Yes. Okay. I cut the frame out a second time in a light blue cardstock from my stash. I have no idea where I got it, and I don't know the color name, but any light blue would work. And then I also used the big scallop frame from the same blueprints die set, and I cut that out obviously in red cardstock. Adhered the frame set down, or the frame die down, and now I'm gonna be piecing all those little parts in there. I used Tombow multi-mono liquid glue for the squares and the rectangle, and I placed the acrylic block on top of them just to kind of hold them in place so that the glue has an opportunity to really grab down to that red cardstock. And this, that frame die, I love it because the squares and the rectangle, they fit just perfectly inside. There's no weird space or anything once you get them in there. For their little Santa hats, I wanted to add just a little bit more shading. So I used BG10, and then I blended that out with my colorless blender. Then I decided, oh, they need some sparkle. So I added a tiny bit of stardust stickles on the outer edge, and then just kind of spread it around with my finger a little bit. Once I was done with that, I decided that the word Christmas needed to have some bling on it as well, so I brought in my, oh no, wait, I add rosy little dots to their cheeks, and for that I used R00. And here's when I bring in the Wink of Stella pen, and I just go over the letters from the die. And once I am done with that, I finish putting the card together by mounting that panel onto a top folding white note card that is A2 size. And I do appreciate you watching. Thank you so much for subscribing and liking. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so, and there will be a link to a few more videos at the end of this one if you would like to watch those. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.